Welcome to the Grizzly Beat, a podcast of Grizzly Times and Louisa Wilcox, where we interview scientific experts, managers, Native Americans, writers, and others to share their knowledge, perspectives, and experience. This comes at a time of enormous interest in the grizzly bear's future as the government proposes to remove federal protections, and citizens are asking important questions. We hope the information shared here will help listeners shape their own answers. So this is Louisa Wilcox in the Grizzly Beat, and we're here with Michelle Uberuaga. Michelle is the Executive Director of the Park County Environmental Council, a grassroots conservation organization operating north of Yellowstone Park in a county the size of Rhode Island. Michelle works to protect grizzly bears, wolves, and bison that are part of her beat. Michelle, you started out studying biology, and then you went to law school at University of Montana when President Bush was working to dismantle the country's environmental laws with the idea you'd become an environmental litigator. And yet now, here you are in Park County, the director of a grassroots group on the edge of Yellowstone. What changed your path?
That's a great question. I think that in order to affect change, you have to have a lot of tools in your toolbox, and I had worked as a grassroots organizer, and it kind of felt like we hit a lot of walls under the Bush administration, and litigation seemed like a really important tool. And so I went to law school, and I did do a little bit of environmental litigation, and I still do. But I don't work for a traditional firm. I work in my basement on issues as they arise that I can fit into my schedule. But I get to balance that with working on grassroots efforts right in my community with the people here that are kind of on the front line of so many of these really big, important environmental issues. And I think I'm really a people person, so I like to be able to be out in our community working with people, and then when the time comes to sit at the desk, I can do that as well.
So, Michelle, can you talk a little bit more about some specifics, like what kind of issues and how you work in a grassroots way in the community?
Yeah, so I think the important part of grassroots to me is that we are, at Park County Environmental Council, there's 2 staff and a board, and so with a really small organization, and our role is to work with the community to empower community members, to empower community leaders, to help them protect our community, so working with people on issues that matter to them, and that means, setting up educational meetings and providing information, so sharing what we're learning with people in the community, connecting community leaders with their elected officials, and making sure that their voices are heard, kind of not just locally, but also all the way up to the top. And it also includes just participating in all sorts of different community events and talking about, the environmental issues that matter here.
Can you describe perhaps a particular success that Park County Environmental Council has faced?
I can speak to a small. This is a small, but I think a really nice success story. PCEC for a long time organized annual electronic waste cleanups, and that required a lot of volunteers and bringing in a company to gather the waste, and then eventually, because it was so effective, the county just took that program over. So we no longer had to do that, and now the county gathers e-waste. So that's an example of kind of building the demand and then showing that this can be something that needs to stick around. So that's one victory, and then we've had some bear victories in the past as well. And I can maybe save that for our bear conversation, or do you want to hear about that?
No, go for it.
Okay. To get ready to chat with you today, Louisa, I got to sit down with PCC's first executive director, Jim Barrett. And PCEC's been around since 1990, but he came on, our first staff person, so it was all volunteer board until 1998. And Jim lived in Cook City. He lived in Cook City, and I think part-time maybe in Livingston as well. But Livingston, I think he came in 1975, right as the bears were going on the endangered species list. So he's been there since, and so he's seen the kind of evolution of bears interacting, coexisting with people in local communities. And he was sharing the story of how, bears were spectacles, kind of all just wandering through backyards and eating garbage. And how Cook City had the dump was just a place where food was, literally piled, which was also common in the park in that time. I think they even put bleachers up around. Maybe they actually had so that people could come and watch the bears, and it was a really positive thing at one point. And then they started to realize that eating garbage was not good for bears, and had to work to change that. And so Jim, through his work at PCEC and with some other groups, was really instrumental in changing the way Cook City managed garbage. And they closed the dump, then they moved it into town, and it sounds like it went through there was a dump in town that at first was dumpsters, but the bears, of course, could still get in them. And then they put a fence around, but then the bears would crawl over the fence. And they put an electric fence up, and that didn't do much. And then eventually they had some success when they worked with I think it was with the Department of Transportation and Forest U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they got some money brought in to the community to build an enclosed trash compactor in Cook City so that all the waste went into a building, was compacted in there. And Jim described that as a real win-win. Everybody was happy. It was good infrastructure for the community. It helped the bears, and it reduced conflict. So that was a good victory. And then other communities around, the edges of the park have done similar things with waste management. So.
That's great. So I know you've been spending a lot of your time working in the Paradise Valley north of Yellowstone Park on a particularly interesting and problematic threat to grizzly bears and the environment in general. And that is a mine, a proposed new mine that a Canadian company is bringing to the Emigrant Peak and Paradise Valley area that has the community up in arms. Can you talk about what the impacts of that mine would be and what PCEC is doing about it?
Yeah, so Lucky Minerals, Inc. has proposed a pretty large industrial-scale gold mine operation in Emigrant Gulch. We learned about it last June through a scoping letter from the Forest Service. And, it really wasn't until we took a look at the company's website we could really tell what their full plans were. The scoping letter kind of talked about some exploratory drilling on public lands, but the company's website was way more expansive. And so ultimately they had staked claims on over 2,500 acres on both private and public lands in Emigrant Gulch. That's covers a lot of area back there, and 3 drainages to the Yellowstone River. So Emigrant Creek, and then over into Mill Creek, and then over into the 6 Mile drainage as well. So potentially could have devastating impacts on our waterways. Of course, gold mining does not have a good history of protecting water. We have gold being mined from a sulfide ore body, which leads to acid mine drainage, and that can have really devastating impacts on aquatic life. But the Emigrant area is also home to grizzly bears, wolverines, and lynx. And I've heard just anecdotal stories from colleagues that, Emigrant Peak's the only place I've ever seen lynx in the wild. And I saw wolverine prints up there, and even a local landowner who claims to have seen a wolverine in the wild. And then bears are also very common, and one of our county commissioners who's supportive, Steve Caldwell, likes to talk about running into grizzly sign on top of Emigrant Peak. So lots of wildlife, and then it's also really important just community recreational access, and then not to mention the businesses there that depend on that, like Chico Hot Springs and the vacation rentals. So that's, and the community really responded very quickly and effectively, and in a unified manner in opposition to this type of development. So it was really rewarding when we started spreading the word through community meetings, just the huge outpouring of just the way the community was rallying to do whatever needed to be done. It was really empowering, really exciting, exciting in the sense that in these situations with big mining companies, I think local communities often feel helpless, and we responded so strongly and so quickly. We're actually winning, I would say, now, and we've got a good chance of stopping this mine. Of course, we've got potentially years and years more to go and lots of hurdles, but we got in really early, so hopefully we can start stopping them before there's even boots on the ground up there. So, and then, there's also a second mining proposal in our valley.
Oh, right.
Crevice, and a little bit different situation, a slightly smaller company. They've got Lucky Mineral has Canadian backing. They're actually a Canadian company. This Crevice is Australian backing. Yeah. And their proposal is all on private land, but the developer wants to dig underground. It claims it can do a massive gold mine with very little surface area disruption by digging underground tunnels onto public lands, and that mine is on the border.
They're right on the border of Yellowstone Park, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and right in the primary conservation area for grizzly bears, so also really important wildlife habitat.
Right. And one of the big issues with mines is that under the 1872 mining law, the federal government really can't say no to a mine. And so the grizzly bear and other species will, if it goes forward, get the short end of the stick. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of frustration, I think, with the 1872 mining law, but that's the unfortunate reality. It's a slow march towards a mine. We can use our environmental laws, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Montana Environmental Policy Act, to review the process to make sure that they're, abiding with the law. But ultimately, it does look like permitting a mine is the end of the road. There are some strategies, though, that we are working on to protect the public lands that surround the private mining claims. And so there are ways to do that under the 1872 mining law, which we're exploring right now. So,
well, good going. And also the political base of support that you're developing is really critical. And I guess that gets me to another question for you with the diversity of Park County, which, of course, has a timber mill and a hardcore ranching base on one hand, and also on the other, movie stars and artists and committed liberals, including a prominent Bernie Sanders constituency. And what are you doing to find a base of support given the wild diversity that we have here?
Yeah, I like the way you put that. It's true. We have a very eccentric community, which makes it a really cool, fun place to live and raise children. and I would say that my effort is to be, I think you really have to be open-minded and find common ground. You have to recognize that there's so many different people that think different ways, and you meet on the street and you meet at the grocery store and you chat at the coffee shop, and then you're in community meetings, maybe on opposite sides, maybe on the same side, depending on the issue. So I think it really it's a really important reminder of treating people with respect and recognizing that you can disagree in respectful ways, and that way when it comes time to work together, it's not a problem because you've got relationships that can survive disagreements and thrive when there are opportunities to work together. And I think that's critically important. And our Mind campaign has been an issue that's really brought people together across political lines. There's a real diverse group of people that don't want to see mining in our valley for lots of different reasons. So some that care really vehemently about wildlife and grizzly bears and wolves, and others that care more about whether or not that changes the quality of life and therefore the quality of employees that they can hire at their business. So I'd say a really diverse range of reasons why people are opposing the mines.
So, Michelle, you work obviously on a very, very local basis, but you also work on a national scale, and recently you initiated a nationwide petition drive for grizzly bears on change.org, and so far it's garnered over 100,000 signatures opposed to grizzly bear delisting. Maybe you can talk about your views on delisting of Yellowstone grizzly bears and what you hope the petition will accomplish.
Yeah, so as a local group faced with these national issues, we're lucky to have access to all sorts of different tools online. So that petition that you mentioned, it was actually through Care2, which is the petition site, and kind of the competitor with Change, but very similar. And I just went on there today, and we have 117,000 signatures.
Wow.
And so then the question was, can you remind me the question again? I think.
Well, just what your views on delisting are, how you got started with this petition, and what you hope it will do.
Of course. Why did we do the petition to begin with? Yeah. So the delisting issue, I came across. It was creating a lot of concern in our local community summer and fall, as the kind of writing was in the sand that this was coming down the pipes. We were so lucky in Park County to have, not only that great diversity of politics, but also some renowned scientists that work on these issues. And one of those is Dr. Jesse Logan, who is on the PCEC board. And Jesse and I were chatting along with other grizzly bear advocates, including Doug Peacock this summer, about the fate of Yellowstone grizzly bears and what it would mean for them to be delisted and what we could do locally. And so that kind of spurred our efforts. PCEC, our board, is very concerned about delisting the grizzly bears, and working to protect grizzly bears has been a part of our mission since we were founded in 1990. So it's not new territory, but it's definitely a big issue. We have to be thoughtful about how we dive in and what we can do. But inevitably, the concern is that we don't think that Yellowstone's grizzly bears are ready for delisting. Let me look at my numbers here. It was in 2015, last year, there was about 70 bears. This is Jesse sent me some science here that 70 bears were killed. So that was about 10% of the total population. Of course, grizzly bears are the slowest reproducing mammals in North America. That's a pretty high mortality rate. And I don't think you have to be a PhD in ecology to understand that. The other, I think, big, obvious concern for us is climate change. And that, again, is something that I think resonates with our local community and across the country and across the world. You know, our species all around the world face the threat of a changing climate, and I think that threat is particularly dire for grizzly bears. So that's a big concern. And climate change is changing bears. The way that they, you know, their food sources, they're losing some critical food sources. We're concerned about grizzly bears as an isolated population. You know, we don't want, and this is, I think, all bear advocates share this concern that we need grizzly bears. They can't exist in an island population in Yellowstone National Park. They need to be able to migrate north. And removing the bears from the endangered species list and opening up state-led trophy hunts is really is not going to help bears move north, and in fact, it will probably prevent that from happening. So the hunting of grizzly bears is also a huge concern. And yeah, I know residents in Park County, members of PCEC, are not eager to hunt grizzly bears. So I'd be really disappointed to see that happen.
Well, it's a huge response you've gotten, and far beyond Park County.
Well, yeah, and so, I mean, that's the other thing is we have impacts in our local community, but really grizzly bears are matter to not just this local community, but to the country and to the world, and I think that's what the petition demonstrates, is that, you know, when we were able to circulate it to a national audience, and it's really picked up momentum. And so those 120,000 signatures, or the 117,000 that we've got right now, are from all over the country and all over the world. So, you know.
It must be pretty gratifying. So, Michelle, you and your husband have two children, Lucia and Neva. I don't know if I pronounced that right.
It's Luca.
Luca.
And Neva.
And Neva, okay. So what kind of effect has growing up near Yellowstone and your work seemed to be having on them, and what do you hope they grow up with?
Oh, well, I was really lucky to grow up in a national park community, and I think that it helped shape my worldview, and I think that I want a similar experience for my children. I think that's common. I want them to spend lots of free time outside in wild places. I want them to understand what the diversity of an ecosystem means, and that there are, you know, large predators like grizzly bears and wolves, and there are diversity of birds. My 4-year-old loves birds of prey, and you know, I think that they're just my 2-year-old can identify the difference between elk, moose, you know, all sorts of different wildlife species that I think are probably not even common language for most 2-year-olds. But so I think growing up in a place like this, you just your whole worldview is different because you see yourself as part of an ecosystem, or I hope that they see that. So I think it's a really special thing.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Michelle. We're with Michelle Uberuaga and the Grizzly Beat. Thank you very much.